passed out this sheet which has the photographs of the headstones that are here and the names of the people. So the large headstone back there on the ground, the angular one, is my grandparents, William Teuton Congdon, his wife, Charlotte Frances Clift. And he was called Will. Everybody called him Will. He was born in 1876 up in Vermont.
Excuse me, John. Do you have an extra paper for...
That's all I have. I only gave us 6 of these. So that's the first headstone here. Then my mother is the second one here. Born in 1915, not far from here, just up the hill in Upper Ridgewood. She passed away in 2006. And then we have Mary Teuton, which is right here. Mary Virginia Schatz Nee Teuton, her maiden name is Teuton, was born in 1846 and died in 1896 at age 50. She was the sister of Adelaide Louise Teuton, which is Will's mother. Will Congdon's mother. Adelaide Louise Teuton married Charles Henry Congdon up in Vermont, in Wallingford, Vermont. So Mary Teuton Schutz is the great aunt of my mother. And then we have Clarence W. Schutz, which is her husband. That's how she picked up the Schutz name. He was born in 1843 and died in 1893 at age 50. They both died when they were 50. He was the son of Nehemiah Schutz and Sarah Jane Luke. So he's the husband of my mother's great aunt. And then we have Sarah Cornelia Hall. Right back there, it says Sarah C. Teuton. And she was another one of the sisters, Adelaide Louise, Mary Virginia Teuton. So she was my mother's great-grandmother. And she was living in this area when she passed away in 1901. So that's the significance of this plot here. And this stone is just a marker for the plot where the Schutz and Teuton is listed. And of course, William, or Will, as he was called, was, related to these Teutons. We don't know how these Teutons came from Albany, New York, and we don't know how some of them ended up down here. But Adelaide Louise, Will's mother, was living in Wallingford, Vermont with her husband, Charles Henry Congdon. And she passed away up there in 1933. And most of the Congdons up there are buried in the Danby, Vermont Cemetery, Scottsville Cemetery in Danby, Vermont. Okay, that is pretty much everything about this plot. So when I decided to hold this event, I put on the event page, I said, you can write a letter to my mother and you can read it or not or whatever, and I never found the time to do that. So I'm just going to speak extemporaneously as much as I can about her life and her being born and living in this area. So my mother was the 6th child of William and Charlotte. Now some of you may think, what are you talking about, 6? There was Clarence, Edward Lester, Edith, and Adelaide. Right? There's four. No, there weren't four. There were two others. And I've been doing a lot of research over the last 9 months on the twins. So Will and Charlotte, or Will and Bertie, she went by the name Bertie, were living in a tenement building in Manhattan. And Will was a accountant. He went to a business school, and he was an accountant working for different firms in Manhattan. And they were living in a tenement house. I have the address and everything. The tenement building is no longer there. There's one right next to it that I'm sure looks exactly like it was, with the fire escapes on the front, all the way down the front of the building and everything. And so they were married in 1896. Now, I don't know anything about their marriage. I don't have any photographs of the wedding. I believe it would have been a civil wedding, and I believe it would have been rather hurriedly. Because they were married on February 12, 1896. And on July 24, 1896, two twin girls were born to Charlotte in the tenement building in Manhattan at about 10:45 in the evening. And little Eva, her mom was named Eva, she never told me what she did. She died at the age of 5 hours. And the other twin, little Charlotte, she lived 3 months and 22 days. Most of that time in the baby's hospital on Lexington Avenue in New York. The building is still there. It's a beautiful old building. But the baby's hospital has been moved now and is part of what's the big hospital in New York? It's part of one of the big hospitals there. So they were born in 1896. Little Eva was interred the day after she was born in Valleau Cemetary in Queens, Long Island, New York. It's a Catholic cemetery, and there are some Catholics up the line in the Cliff or Marvin area I've recently discovered. But we don't know why she was buried in a Catholic cemetery, but it's a non-title grave, means it's owned by the cemetery, not by the Congdons, and there's no marker and no opportunity to ever put a marker there. Little Charlotte Cliff was buried in the Cliff family plot in Paterson, New Jersey, not far from here. And there's no marker. She is buried with her grandfather, Cliff, I believe, or Marvin. I can't remember off the top of my head. And a couple of months ago when I was out here, I went and searched the Cliff family plot, all the cliffs that are back there. I got the burial card from the cemetery office, and I know where she is buried. And I am now working on getting her name inscribed on the headstone with her grandfather so that we know where she is. And that inscription will also say her twin sister Eva at Valleau Cemetary in Queens. So those were the first two children of Will and Bertie. And then Clarence was born about 4 years later, and Edward Lester, father, and then Edith, Charlotte's mother. And that was supposed to be it. They weren't going to have any more children. They had subsequently moved to Upper Ridgefield, somewhere around, well, we know they were living there in 1910 by the census. And they were renting a little farmhouse in Upper Ridgewood. And the 1915 census shows them as owning the house, which is a little odd. Tomorrow I'm going to go to the Bergen County courthouse and I'm going to research the real estate records to find out when they bought the house and when it was sold. So on August 30, 1915, exactly 100 years ago today, Rich's father wrote a postcard to his grandmother up in, I posted this on Facebook, wrote a postcard to his grandmother, Adelaide Congdon, Adelaide Congdon, in Vermont. This postcard, I have this postcard, I scanned it, so I'll pass it around to give copies to anybody. I only have one copy with me. And this postcard says, Hohokus, August 30, 1915. Hohokus is a little village not far from here, just off the side of Ridgewood. And it's where there's a train station there in Hohokus. And it would have been the post office that they would have used. And this says a 6-pound, 2-ounce baby girl arrived this a.m. Her name is Adelaide Frances Congdon, both doing well. Signed Lester. P.S. Length of Edith's dress is 29 inches, not including the hem. Initials ELC, Edward Lester Congdon, and this is addressed to Mrs. A.T. Congdon, Wallingford, Rutland County, Vermont. Now, I can imagine, his mother, Bertie, having just given birth, says you've got to write, a postcard to your grandmother in Vermont, and, he's writing it out, and then he says, oh, by the way, don't forget to tell her what Edith's dress length is, because she asked about that in a letter recently. That's what I'm imagining, okay? And that's what he wrote on this postcard. So, at the time of Bertie's last pregnancy in 1915, she was 40 years old. And it was considered a disgrace in those days to be pregnant at the age of 40. And so, now, Clarence and Lester were in their teens at that point. I think Lester would have been he would have been 14 in 1915. And Clarence would have been 17 or so. But Edith was 8 years old. She was sent away for the summer to live with a friend because apparently Bertie didn't want to have to explain what was happening. Right? And so at some point after my mother was born, Edith came back to the little house up there and was surprised to find a new baby sister. And my mother always said that Edith always held a little grudge about that. I haven't been able to verify that with her daughter Charlotte, so who knows, People say things, it was an impression, whatever, that she had. So Adelaide started growing up in that little house. We have a few pictures of her running around in the yard as a baby. We have a picture of her mother, Bertie, holding her when she was a newborn. So that must have been probably the next day or two after she was born. And in November of 1917, when my mother would have been about 2 years and 2 months old, Will Congdon came down with appendicitis and was taken to the hospital, and he died when my mother was just 2 years old. He was still working in Manhattan, so he would have been taking the train from Hohokus down to Secaucus and then on into Manhattan every day and back again. And people still do that today. It's a normal commuting route for people that live out here. So Bertie had no means of income whatsoever. She started taking in laundry and stuff like that, but ultimately she couldn't keep the family together. And I believe at that point that your father Lester was piling lumber for some lumber company in the area. And Clarence was out working. Clarence eventually moved to Chicago. So the family was separated at that time. I'm not exactly sure where Edith went. I have to see if Charlotte knows that. But originally, Bertie and my mother went to live with her mother and a couple of aunts at 124 Washington Place in Passaic, New Jersey. This was a cliffed house. The aunts' husbands were all dead, so there were these 3 widows living there with a 2.5-year-old baby. And eventually the widows that owned that house said, this is just too much, we can't handle a baby, and they asked Bertie to leave. Well, Bertie got a job at that time at the Passaic General Hospital as a matron of the nursing home. And she had living quarters in the nursing home, but there was no place there for her baby daughter, Adelaide. So Adelaide was sent off to live with Grace Touton and her husband, Kenyon Hampton. Now, Grace Touton was about 20 years younger than Adelaide Touton, Will's mother. After Will's father died in 1891, the story goes that his mother, Adelaide, couldn't keep control of him. He was a troublemaker. And she sent him down here to New York or New Jersey to live with Grace. And Grace was a real authoritarian. She was known in the family for being strict and not sparing the rod and so forth. And so Adelaide thought that would be good for her son, Will, to have that sort of military upbringing, so to speak. And I presume that that's how eventually he met Charlotte Cliff, because the Cliffs were all living in the same area at the same time, as well as the Touton. So let's see, where are we? So my mother lived there for a while. It's possible she lived with another relative in the Passaic area, but eventually she was given to Grace Touton and her husband, Kenyon Hampton. In spite of an uproar from the family saying, well, you know, Grace is very authoritarian and very strict, you know, we've known that, but that was what happened. And the Hamptons bought a house in Dunellen, New Jersey, about 1919, and little Adelaide was taken there to live with them. Now, Dunellen is about an hour drive from here. In those days, it would have taken about 4 to 6 hours to get there by train and bus, so it was a very long distance from her mother up in Passaic, which is not very far from here. And so she was living in Dunellen. She went to school there. Had pictures of her in the school class there with a very angry frown on her face, like a 6-year-old or something. Sometime between 1923 and 1926, Kenyon and Grace decided they would seek their fortunes in California, and they left New Jersey and moved to Glendale, California. They took a ship through the Panama Canal, something I'll be attempting to reproduce this coming January, and took up residence there in Glendale. And my mother started in school there, in grammar school there. But Grace, as I've said, was very authoritarian. My mother characterizes it as if she was physically and mentally abused by her great aunt in many different ways, and I won't go into all of them. And again, this was my mother's perception. We don't know, what is truth, but this was indeed her perception. And at the age of 13 in 1929, she finally had enough of this abuse, and she left her grade school at lunchtime and walked across the street to the Catholic church, picked up the phone and called her mother back here in New Jersey. I'm still planning to search for that Catholic church and perhaps reimburse them for that phone call someday. Because in those days it was probably a fairly expensive phone call. She called her mother up and pleaded with her mother to get her back home at the age of 13. Well, her mother had a job at that point and had enough money, and so it was arranged that my mother, in February of 1929, was put on a train in Los Angeles for the ride back to New York, unaccompanied, all by herself. Her great aunt